Edward sat alone in the quiet stillness of his grand foyer. The echo of footsteps long vanished. At 70, he had built a life of abundance. Lavish rooms, polished floors, silent hallways, yet each day seemed emptier than the last. He thought often of the daughter he once held close, and of the closeness he'd lost somewhere along the path of business deals and ever-expanding fortune. Those regrets weighed on him, carving a slow ache in his heart. That was before the night he found himself at a modest community fundraiser, nursing a cup of tea in a crowded hall. Amid the chatter, a young woman, tears in her eyes, mistook him for someone else and flung her arms around him in a desperate hug. In her mortified apology and trembling voice, Edward felt something spark, something that reminded him how precious a simple, caring touch could be. What began as a startled moment of confusion would soon unravel into an unexpected bond. For Anna, struggling in a failing marriage and drowning in everyday burdens, it was a fleeting moment of comfort. For Edward, it was a chance at fatherly compassion he thought he'd never feel again. Their story would weave together the threads of loss and hope, teaching them both that genuine love can sometimes appear in the most unlikely forms, even through a single hug, delivered by mistake. Before we begin, let us know where you are watching from, or a simple "thank you" in the comments means the world to us. And don't forget to subscribe. Anna hurried away from the community hall, still reeling from the accidental embrace she'd given the dignified older gentleman. Her face burned with embarrassment, and she wondered if she'd ever be able to look him in the eye again. That night, she returned home to find her husband, Victor, slumped in a worn armchair, his expression pinched with worry. Bills, doctor's notices, and a mortgage statement lay scattered on their small kitchen table. Their marriage had seen better days, days when stress didn't seep into every conversation. Now, they mostly exchanged tired complaints and hurried goodbyes between work shifts. Victor glanced up, catching the flush in Anna's cheeks. "Everything all right?" he asked, trying to sound gentle but unable to mask the strain in his voice. He'd been searching for extra shifts at the warehouse, and each rejection only deepened his frustration. Anna mustered a small smile and nodded, deciding not to mention her strange mix-up at the fundraiser. She sensed he was in no mood to hear about another man, accidental hug or not, and the thought of explaining made her stomach twist. Yet, as she went about her nightly chores, setting aside leftover food in the fridge, rinsing cups in the sink, Anna's mind drifted back to the man she'd hugged. He hadn't flinched or pushed her away. Instead, he seemed oddly moved, almost grateful for that stolen moment of warmth. The image of his silver hair and kind eyes stayed with her, stirring a mixture of comfort and curiosity she couldn't quite name. In the back of her mind, she wondered who he was and whether she'd ever see him again. That very question found its answer sooner than she expected. A few days later, Anna spotted a handwritten flyer at the market. It advertised part-time administrative help needed for a local philanthropic project, organized by a certain Edward Murray. Her heart jolted at the name. She recalled it from the fundraiser program where she discovered that a notable donor named Edward Murray was attending. Could this be the same man she had embraced by mistake? It seemed too large a coincidence to ignore. Standing in the produce aisle, Anna brushed aside her worry that applying would be awkward. She needed the income, and a quiet voice inside her whispered that perhaps fate had placed this opportunity in her path. Without telling Victor, whose pride often bristled at the mention of side jobs, she jotted down the address. Later that evening, while he was resting, she carefully composed a letter of inquiry and emailed it to the address listed on the flyer. Her heart thumped as she clicked "Send." She had no idea that her small act of courage would open the door to a relationship far more meaningful than a mere work arrangement, one that would stretch beyond conventional boundaries of boss and employee and instead tap into the gentle, healing power of paternal love Edward had longed to give. It was only 3 days after sending the message that Anna found a reply waiting in her inbox, a polite invitation to meet at Edward's estate. The estate address startled her. She'd expected a modest office, not an address that hinted at wide, gated grounds. Gathering her courage, she borrowed Victor's car one afternoon, letting him believe she was simply running errands. The fewer questions he asked, the better for now. The moment Anna turned onto the long, tree-lined driveway, she felt her nerves spike. Massive oaks formed an arch overhead, the late afternoon sunlight dancing through the leaves. The imposing front doors of Edward's stately home came into view, flanked by tall windows that gleamed in the light. Anna could hardly believe such a place existed within half an hour of her modest neighborhood. A uniformed attendant opened the door, directing Anna down a richly paneled hallway. At the end, she found Edward waiting in a drawing room filled with books and overstuffed chairs. He rose from a burgundy armchair and greeted her with a smile of recognition, a more genuine, at-ease expression than the polite social mask she'd seen at the fundraiser. His silver hair caught the golden rays of evening sun. "Anna," he said softly, motioning for her to sit. "I'm so glad you reached out." Her cheeks warmed. "Thank you for inviting me," she replied, her voice a touch shaky. Every nerve felt on edge, but Edward's gentle tone put her somewhat at ease. She realized with a wave of relief that he didn't appear upset or embarrassed about their previous encounter. Once she settled into a chair opposite him, Edward described the administrative role he needed filled, organizing donation records, scheduling charitable events, and occasionally helping with correspondence. It was the kind of part-time job that could fit around her other work. Anna's mind raced, weighing the need for extra income against her husband's skepticism. Victor disliked the idea of her working for some rich man, as he had often sneered, but right now their bills were piling up at a rate that gave Anna sleepless nights. Edward paused, noticing her hesitation. His gaze was kind, fatherly in a way she hadn't experienced even in her own home. "You seem uncertain," he said gently. "Is there something you'd like to ask?" Anna took a breath, twisting her fingers in her lap. "My husband, Victor, he's wary of situations like this. People with, well, a lot of wealth." She averted her gaze, fearing she might sound ungrateful. "I don't want him to feel threatened or overshadowed." For a moment, Edward's eyes flickered with sympathy and perhaps a tinge of sadness. He walked to the window, hands clasped behind his back, and looked out over the estate's manicured lawn. "I understand," he said at last. "I've encountered people who assume wealth and power go hand in hand with selfish motives, but my intention here is simple. I could use an extra hand, and in return, I'm happy to pay a fair wage." He turned back to face her. "I won't interfere in your personal life, Anna, unless you want me to." She exhaled slowly, feeling the knot in her chest loosen. There was something profoundly reassuring in the way he spoke, as though he respected her boundaries. "Thank you," she whispered. I need this opportunity." Edward offered a warm nod. "Then consider yourself hired," he said, "and if Victor has any questions or concerns, he's welcome to speak to me directly. Sometimes a good conversation can clear the air." The relief that flooded Anna left her momentarily light-headed. Her eyes glistened and she nodded, half laughing at the wave of emotion. It felt like her burdens had eased a notch, like someone had recognized both her talent and her need. As Edward walked her back toward the foyer, she caught sight of a small family photograph perched on a side table. A younger Edward, smiling with a girl who looked to be about Anna's age now. A pang of curiosity struck her. Was that his daughter? Anna didn't ask, but the quiet wistfulness in Edward's expression as he turned away from the photo tugged at her heart. She suspected that behind his gentlemanly demeanor stood a man who carried his own silent pains. In the car ride home, she couldn't help but feel they both had found something unexpected in each other. Solace, perhaps, or a glimmer of understanding unspoken in words. And though she feared Victor's reaction, a small spark of hope flared in her chest that maybe, just maybe, This job could become a balm for more than their financial troubles. Anna drove home in a swirl of mixed emotions. Hope sparked by the new job, dread at how Victor would react, and a curious warmth for Edward's quiet kindness. As she pulled into their modest driveway, she resolved to tell her husband the truth. Better to be honest than have him discover it on his own. Yet when she stepped inside, she found Victor on the couch, staring at another stack of overdue bills. "Anna," he said, his voice clipped with tension. "Where have you been?" She swallowed, removed her coat carefully. "I went for a job interview with a man named Edward Murray. He's wealthy, yes, but he needs administrative help." Victor's eyebrows shot up. "Wealthy, is he?" A brittle laugh escaped. "So, what? You're off to be some rich guy's assistant. Might as well offer him free house calls." Anna stiffened. She had half expected suspicion, but the bitterness still stung. "Please don't mock me. This job can ease our finances. Maybe even help with your mother's hospital bills. It's above board, Victor. There's no catch." He flung the bills onto the coffee table. "We'll see." For a time, Anna worked at Edward's estate in tense secrecy, not because she hid it from Victor, but because he refused to hear anything more about it. Day after day, she organized donation ledgers, answered phone calls, and helped plan small charitable functions. Edward was an attentive listener, always encouraging her to share her worries, whether financial, personal, or otherwise. He had a way of pausing before speaking, as though weighing every word with care. Often she caught him gazing at a framed photograph of his late daughter. Though he never spoke of her directly, Anna sensed that her presence filled a hollow spot in Edward's life. Slowly, she began to feel less like an employee and more like something else. She wasn't sure if it was a surrogate daughter, a confidant, or both. When she'd refill his teacup in the afternoon, he'd invite her to sit, sometimes telling light-hearted stories about business adventures and old friends. Other times, he'd slip in quiet reflections on missed opportunities and how a lifetime can vanish in a blink. Anna found comfort in those words, though she also sensed the heartbreak beneath them. Meanwhile, at home, tensions with Victor grew. He worked more hours at the warehouse, but the pay remained meager. Whenever Anna mentioned her day at Edward's estate, Victor clammed up, suspicion creasing his brow. On nights when Anna was too drained to argue, she slipped into bed silently, longing for the warmth in their marriage that once came so easily. One blustery afternoon, Anna's shift ended later than usual. A last-minute flurry of emails had kept her at Edward's desk well into evening. The old man insisted on driving her home. He worried about her taking the bus so late, but Anna refused, smiling as she explained it would only increase Victor's resentment. Before she left, Edward pressed an envelope into her hand. "It's for the hospital bills," he said softly. "I know your mother needs—" "Edward, you can't just—" Anna's cheeks flushed with gratitude and panic. Victor would never accept money like that. He nodded, understanding. "Think of it as me paying you in advance for next month's work, and if you prefer, you can keep it anonymous." His eyes held the same fatherly gentleness she had come to treasure. That night, she slipped through her front door and found Victor pacing in the hallway, tension visible in every line of his body. "You're late," he said without greeting. "I went by the estate to find you, saw the fancy car in the driveway, saw you and him through the window, talking like old friends." Anna's heart dropped. "Victor, I promise I was just finishing up some tasks. He's nothing more than my employer." Victor shook his head, his voice trembling with anger, or maybe hurt. "So you say, but I'm sick of feeling like I'm competing with some wealthy old man. Maybe he's your boss, or maybe he wants to be something more. Either way, I won't live in his shadow." Anna opened her mouth to protest, but something in Victor's eyes told her his pride was deeply bruised. "Please," she said, he's like a father to me, if anything. I know you don't believe that, but it's the truth." He gave a bitter laugh. You're telling me that a random millionaire you hugged in a hallway wants nothing from you but fatherly affection. Right. Though Anna didn't sleep well that night, she found Edward by her side the following morning, concerned. After recounting the confrontation with Victor, she admitted she feared for her marriage. Edward listened quietly, hands folded in front of him. I should speak to him, Edward said, voice firm. He deserves to hear from me directly. No secrets, no assumptions. It took days of gentle coaxing, but eventually Victor agreed to meet with Edward at a modest neighborhood cafe. Anna hovered by the door, ready to intervene if tensions flared. She saw Victor sit stiff-backed, arms crossed, while Edward, leaning on a wooden cane that day, carefully took the chair opposite him. Thank you for meeting me, Edward began, voice low. Victor nodded curtly. I won't stay long. Edward glanced around at the cheerful chatter of families and friends in the cafe, searching for the right words. I'm sorry for any misunderstanding. I know you've been under a lot of pressure. I only want to help Anna, help both of you, if I can. Victor bristled. We're not charity cases. I understand. Edward paused. I'm a widower, Mr. Victor. I lost my wife years ago, and he hesitated, clearing his throat. And my daughter Emily passed away young. I've had no one to care for, no one to guide, for decades. When Anna came into my life, it was like the sun returning to a dark room. Victor's crossed arms loosened ever so slightly. He didn't speak, but his stare turned from outright hostility to something more questioning. She's not my daughter, Edward continued, but in helping her, I feel as though I'm honoring the memory of my own child. I have no intention of stepping between you. My hope is to support your family, not break it. Victor's lips parted, words failing him. Anna, hovering behind the glass door, felt tears prick her eyes. She'd never heard Edward speak so openly about his losses. An older couple at a nearby table caught sight of him and gave a small, sympathetic nod, as though sharing in the sorrow he carried. Finally, Victor managed, Why would you do that for us? For her? Edward gazed at the table, gathering his thoughts. Because I understand regret, and I've learned it can eat away at you if you never share what you have with those who need it. It might be money, or it might be wisdom, or simply an ear to listen. I didn't have anyone to give that to for a very long time. Silence stretched, the tension tempered by quiet realization. Victor exhaled and rubbed the back of his neck. I suppose I misjudged you, he said gruffly, meeting Edward's eyes for the first time without resentment. Edward reached across the small table and patted Victor's hand, a fatherly gesture. I'm just an old man, trying to do the right thing with the time I have left. A small tear escaped Anna's eye as she watched them. In that understated exchange, she sensed the thick wall of suspicion starting to crumble. The two men, one older, one younger, were finding a fragile common ground built on honesty and shared respect. From that day on, the mood between Anna and Victor gradually softened. He allowed himself to see Edward not as a threat, but as a caring figure who genuinely wanted to help. Though the bills and challenges didn't vanish overnight, the newfound unity in Anna and Victor's relationship made every hardship more bearable. Edward, for his part, became a steady presence, inviting them both occasionally for a simple dinner. Sometimes he showed Anna household tasks to earn extra pay. Other times he'd beckon Victor to join them, discussing how they might set aside savings or navigate medical expenses for Anna's mother. In these moments, Edward offered not just money, but the wisdom he'd accrued from a lifetime of triumphs and failings. One evening, after a casual meal at Edward's estate, they gathered in his cozy den, the fire crackling in the hearth. Victor stood by the mantel, warming his hands. Anna sat on the couch, feeling a grateful lump in her throat for how far they'd come. Edward, a bit tired, sank into his favorite armchair with a sigh. I think, he said slowly, it might be time we stopped calling me Mr. Murray, Don't you?" Anna's eyes glinted with a soft smile. She rose, crossed the room, and leaned down to embrace him. This time, the hug was no accident. "Thank you, Dad," she whispered, choosing the name that felt right. Tears glistened in Edward's eyes as he wrapped his arms around her, his heart aching with both old memories and new belonging. Victor watched, his expression no longer guarded, understanding that what he was witnessing had nothing to do with romantic desire, only love in its purest, most comforting form. In that moment, the three of them formed a circle of acceptance. Edward had found a way to fill the hollow space in his life left by loss, Anna had gained a father figure who believed in her, and Victor realized he had an unexpected mentor who only wanted to lift them up. They still had hurdles ahead, bills, work stress, and the normal strains of daily life, but they would face them together, buoyed by warmth and trust. Late that night, as Anna and Victor drove home in contented silence, Anna looked out at the moonlit sky, feeling a profound peace she hadn't experienced in years. For the first time, she believed her marriage would endure, guided by Edward's gentle influence and the unity born from truth and understanding. No longer was she burdened by the shame of needing help, nor was Victor consumed by jealousy. And an elderly millionaire, once haunted by solitude, now had a family to call his own, even if it wasn't the one he was born into. They'd found each other in a single mistaken hug, and discovered that some bonds run deeper than blood, growing from the seeds of compassion and second chances. For an old man yearning to be needed, and a young couple desperate for guidance, that fleeting, accidental moment had become the root of a lifelong connection, one that would see them through whatever came next, hand in hand. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like it and share it with someone who needs a reminder that kindness still exists in this world. Sometimes all it takes is one person willing to stop, look closer, and make a difference.